This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, and you've got to go for your dreams no matter what other people say. For instance, people told Beethoven that he would never be a musician because he was deaf. But did he listen? My co-host is John Pasden, and he told me that if he owned a bookstore, he'd make it very, very tricky to find the mystery section. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner joining you from Utah here in the United States.
Hi everybody, my name is John Pasden and I am living and coming to you from Shanghai, China.
John, we've had some busy times lately. I just moved houses and offices and it's been a little crazy. So we did miss last episode, but we're here.
Yeah, lots of crazy stuff going on, but we're happy to make time to put more new podcasts out there.
That's right. And we got some great stuff coming down the line. I've got some interesting people lined up for some interviews, but you're going to have to stay tuned for that. So keep your eyes open. We got some fun stuff coming down the line.
All right. But today, since we haven't done it in quite a while, we're looking at some reader questions and reader comments. It's been a while, hasn't it, Jared?
Yeah, it has been. So you know what, John, let's go ahead and dig into this because we got some fun stuff going on. I'll ask the first one here. This comes from a YouTube comment from Elena Leeds 8505. And this is in response to episode 42, How to Get a Laugh in Chinese. She says, "Hi, John and Jared. I really enjoyed this advice and found it helpful, accessible for native English speakers, and very interesting and funny. Hey. Learning about humor in Chinese is super cool. I found the guest appearance interview from Laszlo Montgomery very interesting, especially considering his background in Chinese history. His story about how he became interested in learning Chinese in college was super interesting, especially in the context of his career. So here's the question, John. One question I have is, how is sarcasm used or perceived by Chinese people?" You know what, John? That is a great question. I think you should be able to answer this one a little better than me.
So actually, Jared, I've got quite a bit of experience on this because when I first came to China and I got more conversational in my Chinese, I tried quite a bit to be sarcastic with Chinese friends. And I'm tempted to say that the answer is that sarcasm is not perceived by Chinese people because it just never worked. Later on, I realized that, it was actually me. Like humor doesn't work the same in different languages and that it is possible to be sarcastic in Chinese. But I've seen other people do this too. And they try to be sarcastic, but the Chinese person doesn't realize they're being sarcastic and they think they're being serious. And then they just have to explain. And it just happens the same way every time.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that, at least in English, expressing sarcasm is very dependent upon the tone of your voice. So he's like, "Can I do this?" "Oh, yeah, sure. You can do it." Right? It's kind of a sarcastic voice. But you can't exactly do that, 可以, right? But it doesn't perceived in the same way, right?
Yeah, you can't be like, "Can you be any more 可以?" Yeah, that doesn't work. So, my wife is very funny in Chinese and she's kind of sarcastic in Chinese, but it's in a Chinese way. And I wish I could explain how it's different, but I can't explain. What I can do though is tell you, don't feel bad if you try to be sarcastic in Chinese and it doesn't work because that seems to be the way it goes for quite a while.
I will say this, John, that one thing I have noticed as I have expressed, sarcasm, but I think I wouldn't say so much. It's more like just kind of like little jokes or something. I'll say maybe something ridiculous, right? And then I'll be like, "Oh, 开玩笑." So just kidding, right? Or I'm just joking. And then people kind of laugh. So it seems like if my times if I look back where I've actually been successful in expressing sarcasm, I have to expressly, clearly say, "I'm just joking."
So if you have to always say that you're joking, does that really count?
Well, if you're sarcastic, sometimes you might just say, "Oh, yeah, I'm not being serious."
Or were they giving you a laugh to be polite because you said you were joking? I don't know.
John, that is a good question.
Anyway, it's difficult to be sarcastic in Chinese. It is possible, but it's going to take a while. Okay, so next we've got a comment on YouTube. It's from our How to Find Your Motivation podcast, number 19. It's from Owen Kempton, 9691. And he writes, "Hey, Jared and John, great episode. I found this really informative on how to think about my motivation for the language. I hope to use Chinese in my career and maybe one day travel to China. I originally took Chinese because I thought it would be cool. Then I realized how unique of a language it is to learn in the United States. As a white male, I catch people by surprise whenever I speak to them in Chinese. Ms. Munford was very interesting to hear from, and her story on learning the language and how she became motivated."
Quick note, interjection. That's Teresa Munford. Her interview was fascinating. She's from England and has learned Chinese back in the 70s before it even opened up. Cool story. Anyway,
I have one quick question for you guys. What topics do you think are the most important to master before a trip to China? Food, weather, travel, etc. And adding on to that, how important is grammar? Will native speakers understand you if you have improper grammar? Thank you guys so much for your time.
well, this is a great question, especially for all those people who want to travel. In that instance, you say, hey, I want to learn a little Chinese before I go to China. I think that is one of the best cases for like a phrase book. We've talked about this before. It's all about kind of what are your language goals? You just want to get around. You just want to be there for like a week or two. And I think a phrase book can be really helpful, but he does pipe up on something else that is important here, just about pronunciation. Can they understand you even if you have a phrase book and you memorize everything?
Yeah, I think phrase books are very useful for this kind of situation, although I think it also kind of depends. And I have another answer too, which is you can make your own phrase book. Like nowadays with ChatGPT, like for example, this past summer, I took my family to Italy and I was preparing for this for a while. And so I made a bunch of notes related to food so that I could be sure to order the things I wanted to order and I could say what I wanted to say. Now, I did not plan on having any discussions about the weather, so I just skipped that entirely. But, some other things related to getting around, accommodations, like I specifically looked up the things that I know I would probably talk about. And I made my own phrase book.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. And something I'm going to point out here, and that you did, John, is that you did this ahead of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, not on the plane either, like weeks ahead of time.
That's a big deal because I think there's two issues specifically, one that's specific to China. But the first issue is that when you need the language, when you need to communicate, you don't frequently have the time, or it makes things a little more difficult or awkward when you have to look it up and like search it right then in the moment, right? So that just slows everything down. So if you prepare it a little bit beforehand and you have like these things ready, then you can at least have somewhere where you can look it up, where it's in your phone or you printed it or whatever. That makes things a lot more easy and readily accessible in the moment. Number two, that's specific to China. A lot of people think, oh, well, yeah, I'll just use ChatGPT then. I'll use the live voice or something, or Google Translate, right? The problem is, especially in China, you may not have connectivity. A lot of these services are blocked. So pretty much all Google services, and John, right? ChatGPT is blocked right now in China. Is that correct?
That is correct. And you can use a VPN, but that's often going to be a slower connection. So it might not work so well, like right when you need it.
Exactly. And your phone may not be all set up, or you may not be all set up to have general connectivity to, the internet within China. Maybe you can get a Chinese SIM card and stuff, but they've even got more restrictions on getting that. Is that right?
SIM card restrictions? I haven't got a SIM card in a long time. Sorry, I can't tell you about that.
Yeah. Anyway, you used to be able, from what I remember, John, you used to be able to just take your passport in and go get one, but I think it's a little more now.
They used to have SIM card vending machines in the airport. I remember that.
Yeah, that was the thing. So you may have some issues. So you can't necessarily always rely, if you're going to China, that, I'm just going to use the internet, even if you have a VPN. Maybe you can if you've got everything set up, but it might take a little more work than you think. So coming back to the point is simply preparation. And there are going to be some people that, hey, that's my goal. I want to learn a little Chinese just for my trip to China. Well, hey, you maybe just do a little more research and preparation in that respect, as opposed to just studying everything, maybe just thinking through and preparing a little bit more, as opposed to, and then study what it is that you've prepared.
Yeah. And a phrase book might be a good starting point, but I feel like a phrase book is never a great solution for any specific person. So for example, pretty much everyone is going to want to study some language related to food. You're going to want to order stuff. But there are things that maybe you like and you don't like. Maybe you have allergies. Maybe you don't eat fish, and you want to prepare that. but your phrase book doesn't necessarily cover exactly your situation. So by just prepping a little bit extra, I think you can get a much better experience out of the phrase book plus the personalization.
I'm going to add one more layer onto this, John, because a common problem is this. Let's say you prepare the perfect phrase book, right? In your own phrase list. And so you got all the things that you want to, questions you want to ask and the things you want to communicate. Okay, great. Can you understand the response? This is a big problem, right? Because all of a sudden you ask something, people understand, and they think maybe you have at least some level of competency in Chinese, and they give you a totally unintelligible response.
Well, when I was saying phrase book, I was also thinking that you're going to study it a bit, not just read exactly the line you want when you want it. Come on, Jared. Our listeners are a studious bunch. They're going to try to learn these words and phrases. But yeah, you're right. If you don't learn it a bit, then you're not going to understand it.
But I mean, even so, there are sometimes I'll ask a question. I'm like, I don't understand that response, right? Or I didn't quite wasn't totally clear on what they're saying. So something else that you can also do is that, I have seen this before where, you can have prompt on a little piece of paper or something, you're just saying yes or no, right? And you can have it in the English and Chinese and set, something like that, yes, no, or have some sort of preset responses. And so the person can simply point to it. And so exactly what they're saying. Or not exactly what they're saying, but, it gives you indication, can or can't, can this way, that way, whatever. So anyway, that's another way to also approach that problem of sometimes being unable to understand the responses to your questions.
All right. And I want to add one more thing, which is you should probably learn to ask where the bathroom is, because that's pretty much always useful. And especially if you're going in the summer, you want to ask if you can buy some water, where's some water. Think about stuff like that too.
El baño.
In Chinese.
Okay, our next question is from Gregor Shathroff. I hope I said that right, John. But he sent us an email. He says, first, thanks of all for the great work. I checked out the podcast because I love the graded readers. He goes on to say, I am using Chinese Pod daily, but what I hate is the variety in vocabulary. Even after doing more than 300 intermediate episodes there, but I still don't have all the HSK4 vocab down. That's why I love your graded readers so much, and if you ask me, I would love you to double down on it. Okay, so I think here, John, he's bringing up saying, I'm guessing he feels like he's more intermediate level, but he's doing intermediate lessons, and he's still encountering new words every time. That sounds like a bunch of them. So what would you say here to Mr. Shathroff?
Let me talk about Chinese Pod a little bit because, I worked at Chinese Pod for about 7 years back in the beginning. I was kind of the designer of a lot of the ways that Chinese Pod created content. And so a lot of this you can kind of understand if you just think about the issues you're going to face by producing lots of content over a long time. So take, for example, the elementary level. You're going to start out by creating all the most essential lessons about, asking where the bathroom is, ordering food, asking someone where they're going or if they need help, these pretty general basic topics. And then the more time that goes by, the more you've covered everything that you think you really need at that level. So one thing that we do is we'd go back and we'd kind of cover the same topic in a slightly different way to reinforce it. And that works pretty well. And then another thing we would do is we do kind of niche episodes. I remember I'm pretty sure it was a newbie episode asking about the Wi-Fi password. Now, Wi-Fi passwords are not really newbie vocabulary, but if you're a beginner learning Chinese and, you're in China for a while, being able to ask what the Wi-Fi password is pretty useful. So we would also do things like that. But getting back to the intermediate level, because it's a higher level, there's more you can cover. So there's naturally a bit more of a variety of vocabulary, but you would still have some of those niche lessons. And because it's intermediate, it would feel a little more niche than if it was at a lower level. And so the result of this is if you study some of the earliest episodes, they're some of the most practical, the ones that you're like, oh yeah, of course this is useful. But some of the later episodes are some of the more niche ones. And so the end result is that you should really carefully choose which lessons you're studying, because if you just study what's the newest, it might not be the most useful for you. And it actually takes quite a bit of time to choose the most useful lessons for you specifically as a learner.
But I think this also, John, relates to the concept, we call it like the intermediate plateau, right? It's the concept of that, like to get to the next level, it takes an exponential amount of vocabulary and learning to progress to that next level. So it's like, you can move through those beginner stages and elementary stages relatively quicker, but that intermediate stage and then going to advanced, it just takes a lot more time.
Yeah, and also you don't want to keep going over the same topics over and over again. So sometimes some of those niche episodes, if it appeals to you, then it does keep it interesting because you do have to listen to a lot of language, learn a lot of vocabulary to get to the next level, like you're saying. But Jared, there's something else I want to say because Gregor, he mentioned that he liked the graded readers, even though he found some of the variety in the vocabulary annoying in the podcast format. And we kind of have the same issue in graded readers because, we created the levels and each level has a certain amount of characters that are the core characters that are repeated across the stories at a certain level. But then there's also a bit of an allowance in every story to go outside of those core characters so that you can have vocabulary that relates to a specific story. And if you didn't do this, it just makes it much harder to tell another story. So like our breakthrough level, which is only 150 characters, it doesn't go outside of that 150 character core at all. And it was so hard to write these stories using only these characters and only the vocabulary that can be created with these characters.
Actually, John, it does. It does go up there. Remember, it doesn't go outside of the level 1 core character. So we borrow characters only from the level 1 standard.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
But that's okay. In the end, though, that's still really hard to do. And I think that the point here to bring up about all that thing about the graded readers is that to highlight, underscore something here, that something listeners may not really pick up on. It's the thing that it is difficult to create very carefully leveled content. All right. And so even that concept of like, hey, Chinese pot, I'm going through these intermediate lessons and I'm really always coming with all this new stuff every time. And yeah, maybe be a little more selective in the lessons you're doing, but it's also very difficult to create lessons, content that really adhere and focus to a very careful level standard. And that level standard is important because as a learner, we need to kind of scaffold that learning, that scaffolding concept of where you kind of take it from step to step to step, as opposed to leaping to leaping to leaping, because that doesn't work so well, jumping huge gaps. And so it's not easy to do that. And that is, I think, one reason why in general, people do like the graded readers, because it is much more of a comfortable progression sometimes than going through sometimes lesson curriculums that may not be, or reading other content that may be not as carefully leveled.
Yeah. So as someone who is in charge of both the leveling at Chinese Pod way back in the beginning, and then also at Mandarin Companion, I can tell you, Jared speaks the truth. Leveling is not easy, but it was also very enjoyable to do it at Mandarin Companion in a way that was not like sort of made more difficult by the sequence of the stories. Because, our stories, you can read wherever you want and you can read them in any order you want and they will keep building on each other. And each story has some
any
of its
order in the level that you're at, right?
Sorry. Yes. In the level. And every story will have some of its own niche vocabulary, but you're still reinforcing all the other vocabulary. So it works quite nicely. And we're proud of that.
Oh, very, very, very much so.
All right. So I think we've answered that question, right?
Absolutely. Okay. Our next question comes from YouTube, Catherine Baze, and she's episode number 8. So, man, this is way back. Tones, Music, and Confidence. This is where we had David Moser on the episode.
A classic episode.
That's right. That's the only interview you did, John. Thanks for pulling your weight, man.
Couldn't top it.
All right. Here's what she asks is, I particularly liked your advice about confidence, that it might help to pretend you are playing a role when interacting with native speakers. That's such a creative way of getting around shyness. I also like the interviewee's point that you should try to gain lots of conversational practice with all different kinds of people, as different people will speak differently and have different things to offer that you can learn from. So the question, do you think consuming Chinese media like TV shows, movies, or social media is an effective way to get a feel for tones and natural speaking flow? Well, John, what do you think?
It does help. But this word effective kind of bothers me because like you think you're going to watch like a couple episodes and then it's like, oh, got the tones. I mean, it does help, but you have to have some tolerance for not understanding what the heck they're saying. Some tolerance for, okay, it has subtitles, but I don't know any of these words or any of these characters. I've been there. It's rough. And so you really just kind of have to put it on and be like, well, I'm just going to listen, and whatever I get out of it, that's what I get out of it. And, I haven't been in that situation for a long time. Jared, I've been in China for 25 years now. And I can turn on the TV and understand pretty much anything I watch without any trouble. The only thing that might give me trouble is these ancient China stories. I don't really do that. But
Yeah.
I do have something that reminds me of what it was like because I'm learning Italian now. And one of my clients at All Set Learning, I was talking to her about her Chinese studies, and she recommended this Italian Inspector Montalbano, this TV show. And so I started watching it, and I could only understand like a few words here and there, but I would just watch it with subtitles. And the more I watch, the more I'm starting to get. I'm like 6 seasons in because I discovered this show was really good.
Really?
Yeah, it's so good.
Wow.
But that's just like hours and hours of listening. And so it has really helped because I really enjoy the story. And so I'm getting so much exposure. And even though I can't just like turn off the subtitles and understand what's going on, I can definitely feel that I'm getting more and more. So the answer again is yes, but you have to have patience and don't be so hard on yourself.
Wow, that's good advice. And I think what I'm going to point out something here, John. I'm going to link it into your comments here. In general, I usually advise people saying, hey, TV shows, movies, social media, it's more of an advanced thing because of just what you said. There's going to be so many words you don't understand. It's not going to be comprehensible input, right? And even if there's subtitles, there's going to be so many characters you don't know and you can't understand. But what I'm going to zero out in on what you commented here is that you enjoyed it, right? And you're talking about the Italian inspector who, what? Not Inspector Clouseau. What is it?
Montalbano.
Montalbano, all right? And you said it's so good, right? Season 6, you've gone through 6 seasons of this, right? Am I hearing correctly?
Well, it's kind of ridiculous in that most seasons only have 2 episodes.
Oh, okay.
But each episode is an hour and a half. So it's like a whole bunch of movies. It's really weird.
Better than a poke in the eye. I got it. Okay. But hey, the point is that you've enjoyed it. And this is something I've seen time and time again, is that we always advise people to, get something that's comprehensible to you, and the target is like not below 90% comprehension. 95, 98 is target, right? But what I've seen time and time again in stories and other people's experiences is that if they were really motivated, they were really enjoying what it is that they're reading or watching or consuming or whatever, they can get through that reading pain or that incomprehensible stage a little better. That's how I come back to this, is that Chinese media, TV shows, movies, social media, is an effective way to get a feel for tones and natural speaking flow? Yes, if you're enjoying it and you consume a lot of it, right? Because then that's when you really start picking up, and you take the time to kind of look through and maybe research or pay a little more attention, and you really start learning. If you're just turning it on in the background just as like, filler noise, maybe you're going to pick something up, but I don't think that's going to be very effective. So it's this whole kind of thing of like, do you enjoy what it is you're consuming? And if you are, you're going to consume more of it and you're enjoying the process, then you're definitely going to learn from that.
But is it effective? I think it's just enjoyable and you do learn stuff, but it's not going to be like the quickest way to do it. But it's not about speed, right? You're doing it because you love it.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, if you're not enjoying learning the language, then, you're probably not really going to get very far.
Oh, but I should mention one thing. I remember when I was in my first year of my Chinese studies, I watched the movie Huozhe.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew I wouldn't understand much. And I just understood a few words here and there. But I was proud of myself because I could understand a few words here or there. I mean, if you have that experience, that's okay too. But now that I'm doing the Italian show, and it's a famous show, which, by the way, ChatGPT knows all about, then I can go in there and start being like, okay, what are some things that the lead character always says? And why does he say it this way? And I have these conversations and it teaches me stuff. And then when I go back and watch the next episode, I understand more. So, again, you got to like it because otherwise you're not going to bother to do all this. But even without looking at the entire transcript of every episode, which I have not done, you can learn more and more as you go if you're enjoying it.
Amen.
All right. So let's go to the next one.
All right. This is the last question we're going to hit up for this episode. And this comes from an email from Ming. And she says, "Hi, John and Jared. I'm a Chinese immersion program teacher." So she's teaching in Chinese dual language immersion. She says, "I've bought all the Greater Reader books plus 20 copies of these 3 books. My Teacher is a Martian, Hua Ma, and Sherlock Holmes and the Curly-Haired Company." She says, "I enjoy reading your books to my students. I'm a big fan of the podcast. Topics are interesting. And because of your talks and interviews, I understand better how people learn Chinese." Now, she asked a question here, John. This is going to be a fun one. "I'd also like to know, what are the habits that would help Chinese learners the most? Do John or Jared have experience about your Mandarin study habits to share? Wish to hear back from you. Thank you very much, Ming." All right. Well, John, that's a question, I haven't really gotten that much. What are your study habits? What are some study habits that will help Chinese learners the most? John, how about you? Do you still even study Chinese?
I mean, I do look up words. I don't put time aside and be like, oh, I'm going to study. So I read, I help my son with his Chinese homework. I watch Chinese shows usually with my kids, but I wouldn't say I'm really studying. But, I do have some tips from back in the day. And I often help my clients at All Set Learning with questions like this. And one of the things that I find is that people forget that effort is important. And if you're using a method that requires no effort, then it's easy come, easy go. You don't really care. So an example of that would be, you have this flashcard app, you press a button, you download 100 flashcards, and then you can study them whenever you want. So it took very little effort to get those flashcards. However, if you make your own flashcards, you write the characters very carefully yourself. Maybe you're putting your own sample sentences onto the flashcards. You put effort into those. And the time and care you took to create them helps with the learning. And I did lots of stuff like that. Like I made notebooks, I made flashcards, and I think that really did help me. But I also carried dictionaries around with me wherever I went because I was in China and I would just look stuff up all the time and then put them into my notes. So I think that's probably enough of my habits to share. Now, what about you, Jared?
Going back to one of the earlier questions, how do you get past the intermediate plateau? I still always feel like I'm intermediate. I know I'm not. I'm above that, but that's what it always feels like to me. So I think one thing is just realizing is that you're always going to be feeling like you're learning, like you're never there, right? Unless you're John living in China for 25 years, right?
I've still got plenty to learn, Jared.
That's right. But what I would say for me, do I actually sit down and study? No, I'm kind of past some of those early stages where I really need to sit down and study. Would I benefit from it? Yeah, probably. But here's what I have going on. So one, I have a Chinese tutor every week. So it's an hour dedicated time and we sit down and we talk. And mainly I do a lot of talking and I do listening. Okay. So the second is that I make Chinese also kind of relevant in my life. Now, this has a little bit to do to some of my career choices. So I have my own business where I do sourcing and I help companies, source and get things manufactured overseas, largely in China, and get that imported. And so almost daily, I am talking to factories or suppliers and stuff in China, and I'm typing Chinese almost every day. And I have some other deals that I work on where I have some Chinese buyers and stuff. And so I have to have some meetings with them and conversations or WeChat, So I think for me, I've kind of made that a little more relevant in my life. And there's also another recent development in my life. I mentioned, John, at the beginning of the episode, we moved, right?
Yeah. Did you move to China, Jared?
I did. No, I didn't. I didn't move to China. But my oldest son went off to college. He's at the university. And we just picked up a foreign exchange student from China. Thought we need to replace the spot in our house. No, that's not really what happened. But, this kid was still looking for a home, a host family, and we decided, okay, let's do it. So now we also have a Chinese foreign exchange student in our home. And so we mainly speak English with him, but it's kind of great for the kids because they'll speak Chinese to him. And the point I'm making up here is that we're making Chinese relevant in our lives, at least in our home. We're having a foreign exchange student. Me, I have a Chinese tutor. I also, with my work, my business, I use Chinese a lot. So I would say about overall, if he's asking the question, what habit's going to help Chinese learners the most? Well, I'm not going to tell you go out there and start a business just so you can speak Chinese, right? But the point is that how can you make Chinese relevant to you in your life? And if you can figure out that question, and so that it becomes some part of your life in some sort of aspect, well, that's going to be an excellent way to continue to learn and progress in your language journey.
That's a really good point, Jared. I did that too, but I'm in China, so it might not be as relevant to all of our listeners. Just to give one little example, though, similar to what you're talking about, which might be more relevant to lower level speakers. When I was still in college, one summer, I wanted to work on my Spanish. And so what I did was I volunteered for a church project, which helps Mexican migrant workers learn English. And so I went there and helped them learn English. Well, their English is quite low level. So they started talking to me in Spanish. And so, of course, I'm going to reply in Spanish. And at that point, my Spanish was better than their English. But of course, I'm helping them with their English. And, there's opportunities all over the place. You just got to look for them. So the same is true for Chinese.
So very true. And on top of all that, I also recommend reading. I would say that for my Chinese exchange student here, hey, you really want to get your English better? I'm like, do you read? And he's like, he read Harry Potter. I said, okay, well, keep reading, man. That's going to really do a lot for your English, and it will do a lot for your Chinese, as long as you can find stuff that's at your level.
And if you're looking for Chinese graded readers, don't forget about Mandarin Companion.
It's only the best Chinese graded readers out there, ever.
All right, so don't forget, guys, you can send us your questions and your comments. It might take us a while sometimes, but we do get to them. We put them on the podcast.
You can reach out to us at feedback@mandarincompanion.com or just visit our website. You can do that there.
All right, keep working hard, guys. 加油, you can learn Chinese.
Yes, you can. You did.
So did you.
Thanks for listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. I'm Jared Turner, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, alongside my co-host John Pazin, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and sinosplice.com. Got a Chinese learning story? We want to hear it. Head over to our website and apply to be featured on the show. If you like today's episode, hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend. It's the best way to help more Chinese learners find us. You can also leave us a review on iTunes. We love hearing from you. Or come connect with us at mandarincompanion.com or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter for more tips, updates, and good times. Want a fun way to boost your Chinese? Grab a Mandarin Companion graded reader. Available on Amazon, Apple Books, Google Play, or wherever you get your books. Apologies to John Cena. We just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by me, Jared Turner, and is edited by Jasper Chua. And a special thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Paston. See you next time.